Chapter 94. Massive Death. Ruthorn continued his narrative. Although the number of volunteer souls working in the engine room like you must seem huge to you, it's only a small number when compared to all existing souls in the entire universe. But the number of Gaia volunteers who have returned are even smaller, so don't be surprised when you are treated with such high respect. It's already time for some groups of the volunteer souls who were born as plants and animals to come back to the embrace of God. By revoking these souls in groups, you can sometimes observe the massive death of a species at the same time. For example, hundreds of thousands of fishes may die suddenly, or a large number of flying insects may gather in one place to wait for death together. But you shouldn't mourn their death, instead, you should feel happy for them. Scientists in your world have put out different hypotheses about these situations. They usually blame the severe environmental pollution as the cause of all those massive deaths, but in fact, that is only one of many factors. No one has ever discovered the real cause. These animals and insects wouldn't gather in one place to die if the cause of their death was pollution. It's actually a symbolic act of showing their intention to die together. They want to show themselves, in the same way in which they chose to come into this world, for the last time before going home. For them it's a joint celebration, Ruthorn explained. Situations like that will gradually appear more and more frequently. The decision as to which group or species will be revoked, and when, depends on God's desire. He will select them and leave only one couple of each species to remain in the world, so that they can rebuild their species when the renewal of the magnetic network has been completed. But the selection process of those species won't be as complicated as that of the humans. God will select a group and that group will immediately follow his will, Ruthorn said. You mean God won't ask for their willingness, like he has asked me? Yes, apart from determining their willingness, every human being must also acquire all necessary qualities before being chosen. Now, as God's representative, you will help the people in your world to gain those qualities so that they can then be chosen by him later. Master Ruthorn, I jumped in. A thought just came to my mind, and I'd like to ask for your verification. Please go ahead and ask. I suspect that I'm not the only one who was chosen to represent God, is that true? I asked. That is true, my friend, Ruthorn said with a smile. In the past, the chosen ones who went on to become spiritual leaders were born in a different era. To put it simply, they emerged one by one at different times, and they never appeared at the same time. But now, this is the era of the greatest structural renewal, the most critical period in the history of your planet, and the world needs more than one leader. Each leader will settle in a different area, each one spread out around the world. Your assumption is correct, you can be assured that you're not the only one. At the moment, God is asking anyone who hears his voice to represent him. He is asking them to be his mouth, his hands, and his eyes. Anyone with a humble heart and who speaks with God's voice will receive the privilege to represent God, Ruthorn said. While we were talking, I noticed that everyone at our table had finished eating, except Ruthorn, who didn't seem to ever eat anything at all. I'd like to thank all of you again for the delicious breakfast. I addressed the women and men who had brought us the food. The four of us then stood up, and when I saw Ruthorn, Pete, and Heph gave a slight bow to the people in the room, I quickly imitated their gesture. "Thank you all very much," we said in unison. Then, Ruthorn led us back towards the building where we come from earlier. "I'd like to congratulate you for finally having become a highly evolved being," Ruthorn said to me while we were entering the building. "What makes you so sure that I've already entered that state?" I asked him. "Because you can hear and respond to the voice with your thoughts now. The truth is that it's not the voice of your own thoughts, but it's actually the voice of God that is sent directly to you. This is what we talked about earlier, it's the flow of limitless knowledge that pours from our souls," Ruthorn explained. "Really? When did that happen?" "This has been happening since yesterday, the moment in which you felt relieved. This feeling of relief was only a byproduct. What actually happened was that your higher self realized that it had reached its highest goal. It was the release of the bond that had restrained you over the last 80,000 years, he said. "Oh, I see," I replied. "I did feel something strange when I was alone in the bedroom, and I was actually about to ask you what that could have been. That was that exact moment in which you entered into the state of enlightenment. From now on, whatever your question may be, you won't have to ask anybody. Ask your inner self and the answer will come to you. Listen carefully to your inner self, and trust it, as this is the truth that comes from the real source. Now you have the tool to perform your duty perfectly as God's representative," Ruthorn said and patted me on the shoulder. "I'd like to tell you a bit more about your role. There will be a larger number of God's representatives who has been assigned at the same time because, at this moment, the world needs a lot of people who can elevate their consciousness to enter the new era safely. This is the reason why God has chosen numerous spiritual leaders at the same time," he told me. "Are there any more leaders at this moment already?" I asked curiously as I really wanted to know if I was alone on this mission or if there were others like me. "It doesn't matter if there are any more of you or not," Ruthorn replied. "Please be aware that this is a very special situation as the end is near. Now, whoever wakes up from his state of sleep, whether by his or her own choice, or by being awakened by one of God's representatives, as soon as the chosen person wakes up, he or she will be granted the right to represent God at once. This right is as legitimate as if it were executed by God himself. I would be surprised if you were able to find someone who can immediately understand the truth that you are about to spread, but when you do come across someone who understands, then that would be a perfectly awake person who could pass on your words to others without distortions. This is partly because of the structural renewal of Gaia's magnetic field, which is starting to benefit more and more people in your world. In that case, we would have a higher chance of waking up more people in a shorter period of time," I commented. "Yes, some people will begin to realize what is happening around them and understand part of the truth. They will start to have new thoughts, like you, and learn that they are able to connect with you and understand what they hear. Unfortunately, this won't happen to everyone," Ruthorn concluded. "Oh, and why is that? Won't everyone understand this?" "Well," Ruthorn replied, "even though everyone has this same ability to understand this, some of them will not want to." "I don't quite understand. Let me explain," Ruthorn said. "During the time in which the network changes, the people with more negative thoughts, who easily get angry and who judge everything by their feelings and emotions, these are the ones who will become more and more impatient. You can already see with your own eyes how many people in your world are capable of committing the worst offenses with just the smallest trigger. Therefore, you will face two types of people. Those who are receptive to the truth that you are telling, and those who want to kill you because they are not happy with you, Ruthorn said. Well, that's encouraging, I said.